Hi. Today we're diving into a fundamental aspect of chess that often goes unnoticed. How pawns and squares can dramatically alter the value and effectiveness of your minor pieces. Whether it's a killer knight jumping from outpost to outpost, or a bishop trapped behind its own pawns, understanding the relationship between pawns and squares is crucial for anyone looking to take their game to the next level. So, if you've ever wondered why a knight on one square can be a hero, while on another it can barely even be called a piece, stick around. We're about to uncover the secrets of pawns and squares in shaping a minor piece's destiny. Now, I'm going to go ahead and open up my first example here. And before we begin, I do just want to make sure everyone understands this is an interactive video. To get the most out of these videos, you need to be using your brain and doing your best to answer the questions I'm asking you. Pause the video if you need. Rewind. Try to really think about your answer and why that is the case. Okay, enough dilly-dallying, let's get into it. Okay, so this position, it's white to move. The first question I'm going to ask you is who is better in this position? Who do you think is playing for a win? So pause the video if you need, and if you're finding this difficult, that's good. Hopefully, by the end of this video, you'll be able to answer questions just like this with absolutely no problem at all. So pause the video and see how you do. Okay, so hopefully you've had time to think about it. Say your answer out loud. Lock it in. I think a lot of beginners would see the two bishops for white and see that it's white's move and stop there. White's better. However, there's more to this than meets the eye. And if you said that black is better here, congratulations, you are correct. But why? Well, it all comes down to the pawns and squares. In this position, white has many weak squares. b4, d4, and c5 jump out at me. Black would love to trade off the dark squared bishops, taking away white's bishop pair and highlighting those weaknesses on the dark squares. Now, I'd like to show you a very similar position. Can you spot the difference? It's white to move. Who has the advantage in this position and why? Pause the video and have a think. Okay, so hopefully you had time to think about it. Say your answer out loud. Lock it in. Okay, so here we have exactly the same position, but there is one difference. The c pawn is still on c2. And that one detail makes all the difference because white suddenly has the advantage. Why? Well, if you noticed, the weak squares on b4 and d4 can now be defended by c3. So let's go ahead and play that for white. This kind of move is widely known as anti-knight strategy. As you can see now, the knight has no nice looking outpost to sit on, and therefore has no future. Now, white has the bishop pair, and can easily come into the position. Notice that there's no pawn on c4 blocking the bishop's path, and with superior minor pieces, white should be able to eventually win this game. So lesson number 1 is pawns cannot move backwards. Every time you move a pawn, ask yourself what weaknesses you are creating in your position. Is moving the pawn really beneficial to you or not? Okay, so moving on to our next example. If I just pull it up here on my screen. Okay, very good. It is white to move. What is white's best move in this position and why? Pause the video and have a think. Okay, so hopefully you had time to think about it. This time, before I give you the answer, I want to ask you another question. Does black have any weak squares? Are there any squares in black's position that can no longer be defended by pawns? I want you to think about this and see if your answer to the previous question changes. White to move, what is the best move? Pause the video again if you need. Okay, now say your answer out loud. Lock it in. Okay, if you said either knight f1 or knight b1, you can be very, very happy with yourself. You noticed that black has weaknesses on a6, c6, and d5. You also noticed that the only square we can really get to is d5. So you played knight f1 or knight b1, intending knight e3 d5, knight e3 d5, or knight c3 d5. And in this position, black has actually done a very bad job with his pawns. Not only has he given white some very beautiful weaknesses to target, but he's also completely shut his bishop and his knight out of the game. These pawns are all traitors here. Okay, so here we see that lesson number 2 is when you find a weakness, you need to make use of it. If white in this game never placed a knight on d5 and never took control of any of black's weaknesses, then the weaknesses never really were weaknesses at all. Okay, now let's look at our last example. So I'll open up here on my screen. Okay, this is a position from a game that I recently played in the Japan Chess Classic 2024 in Tokyo. I'm playing as black here. There are many imbalances in this position. Example, the queen for the minor pieces. But let's focus on the pawns and weak squares. My opponent has just castled. Very quickly, and you should be able to do this quickly now, so no need to pause. What are the weak squares in white's positions? Say it out loud, lock it in. Okay, if you said e4, c4, and maybe even a3, congratulations, you've got the concept of weak squares down. No white pawns can defend those squares. So we can throw a knight there, where it will be an absolute monster. However, it's not so easy to find a path to any of those squares. We can find a path to c4 or a3. For example, what if we go? We've got this way, possibly. Okay. But our knight wouldn't really be doing much there. The square we would like most would be e4, where we would be putting pressure on the c3 pawn. Sorry. Oh my gosh, my arrows. Okay, very good. But there's no way to get there without making weaknesses of our own. So in this position, I thought to myself, I need to create another weakness that I can actually take full advantage of. Can you find the move I played? Pause the video and have a think. This one is a little bit more difficult than the questions before. Okay, so hopefully you had time to think. Say it out loud, lock it in. So the move here is h5. And here, white has a very difficult decision to make. Either he can take the pawn and open up his king to a barrage on the king side. Let's keep in mind that I haven't castled yet. So I can castle this way, bring both rooks over. While also allowing my knight to come into f5. Another thing he might do is ignore my threat, opening his king up to a barrage on the king side, exactly the same idea, while still allowing my knight to come into that new weakness on f5. Or he can do what he played in the game, take the lesser of three evils, and advance the pawn to g5, where my knight quickly plants itself on f5. So if you see, this move h5 has actually created a new weakness that wasn't there before, being the square on f5. So I played knight to f5 right away. This knight is an absolute monster on f5. It's targeting both h4 and d4, and cannot be removed from its post by an enemy pawn. Lesson number 3 is if you can't find a weak square to exploit, you need to create one. Okay, let's move a few steps forward in the game. Okay, here my opponent places his knight on f3. What do you think his plan is with this? And what do you think I did in response? Remember, I've just created a weak square for my knight to live on, and my strong opponent is looking to do exactly the same. Pause the video and have a think. Okay, hopefully you had time to think. Say your answer out loud. Lock it in. Okay, my opponent is trying to create a weakness in my position. His last move, knight f3, sets up a pawn sacrifice by g6. This creates a permanent weak square on g5, which his knight would love to live on. If you got this far in your answer, you can be very, very happy with yourself. You're willing to give up material to create a much needed weak square to exploit. This was White's only hope of winning this game, because with better minor pieces and access to the A file, and White's many weaknesses, I was the one playing for a win here. I needed to stop White's plan, so I played g6 myself, locking down the king side and securing my advantages against White's many weaknesses. Notice that f6 is not a real weakness, because White's knight can never find a way into that square. Okay, so the fourth and final lesson for today is create your own weak squares to control, but be wary that a strong opponent will be looking to do the same. I hope you found today's video insightful and practical. If you did, don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below with your thoughts or any questions you may have. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, keep playing, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.